Hey everyone, this is our character interviews. This is our second one of the day.
Yep.
Now he did me, and now it's my turn. I will be interviewing him about Daraine Harrowind, his elfie boy.
Big elfie boy.
So the first question, I want you to visualize him for the audience. Make sure that they understand that they can picture this guy in their mind. Do it like you're writing a book.
When you look at Daraine, the first thing that you're going to realize about him is his very striking, icy blue eyes that seem to stare right into you. You don't feel like you can hide anything from him. When he looks into you, it's almost as if he sees directly through you. He's got a gaze that is very understanding. It's very gentle, but at the same time, there's a bit of coldness to it. But it's not his fault because he has an expressive deficiency.
We'll get into that.
Yeah, we'll get into that later, though. He's quite tall, 6'5", around 245 pounds, very lean mass. And he's got quite a few scars because he spends a lot of his time practicing martial arts. Most notably on his knuckles, his elbows, his knees, his ankles, his feet. All of the strike points that you can think of are pretty calloused and scarred from all of his practice and training.
Hair.
He's got snow white hair it's very notable. It almost looks like he just grabbed a fucking handful of snow and just put it on his head.
How does he wear it?
And how he usually wears it. So while he's traveling and he's not really got anything planned, he'll wear it loosely to where it just hangs down and drapes on either side of his face.
Mm-hmm.
But whenever he's prepared for combat, he has a ribbon that he ties it up with, and it'll hang behind his head.
What does he wear?
He wears a swath of grays, blues, and whites. It's all robes, but at the same time, underneath it is a chainmail cuirass for his torso to guard himself against multiple forms of weaponry. And around his arms and legs are these martial arts wraps, and they're not wrapped like your normal everyday wraps. They look like they have a hexagonal sort of wrapping pattern because that shaping actually makes it to where he can bend the joints easier, but it still covers.
Okay. So now that he's visualized, why don't you give everyone a description of who he would like? What was his childhood like? How did it shape him as a person? What kind of society did he grow up in?
Here we go.
It's that bad.
Well, the thing about Daraine is he was born into a family that was very, very elitist. He came from a pedigree on both sides. His mother and father were elves that, through their generations, were always working at having the purest and strongest bloodline. And that comes with a lot of pressure. That comes with a lot of societal pressure. Everyone holds you to a higher standard by default. And what Daraine was below that standard by default.
How? Why was he below everyone else's standards?
When he was born, he had a few very notable deficiencies, especially for coming from a pedigree line. And that is the only magic he can practice that he can perform is ice magic. He's completely limited to this form of magic. And the other notable deficiency when he was a child was he had bones like glass. You could smack the kid and it would cause a hairline fracture. You could punch him in the face and you'd crack his cheekbone. He was very fragile. He was very small. He was very weak.
What was his family life like then? Like, describe if he was underneath the elitism by default because of his deficiencies. How did he grow up? How did his family treat him?
His family was incredibly verbally and physically abusive. When he couldn't perform something that they wished, he would be either verbally or physically struck down. His peers treated him terribly all the same, just as well, because he was seen as a second-class citizen by his family and by everyone else around him. He was just seen as lesser. He was seen as less than what he was and less than everyone else.
So how did he cope with these things? How did he cope with all the troubles he went through during his young life?
He didn't cope very well at the time because he didn't know how to deal with it. He was a young boy and he came into the world unloved from the people that were supposed to care for him from the beginning. And it only made his expression of deficiency even worse because he didn't feel like he could show them how he felt, because every time he showed any form of vulnerability, it just was attacked mercilessly. But his childhood wasn't all bad, but a very terrible event led to it getting better.
And that's just what I was going to ask. What pushed him to become better? What pushed him to get out of this horrible rut that his family kept putting him in?
His family, they wanted nothing to do with him. Plain and simple. Once his brother was born, his brother was everything they wanted. Daraine, just a painful reminder that they wanted to get rid of.
I don't like these people.
And what they did was they left him to die in the woods. They knocked him out and just abandoned him. He woke up one day and all he could see was the green of the trees around him in a world that he completely did not recognize. And
what was the event that pushed him to become better then?
What had happened was he was surviving pretty well and he was doing all right because he's intelligent. He can pick up on things pretty well despite his deficiencies because he's naturally mentally acute. But what had happened was he was mauled by a bear, and it seemed like it was all the end for him. And this is a very traumatic experience for him and stays with him for the rest of his life because you're a child getting attacked by a bear. And what had happened was he played dead, and he managed to survive, and he collapsed on the side of the road with a broken arm, a couple of nasty ribs, real messed up. He was in terrible shape. He would have died. But by his luck, a merchant found him by the name of Jodar. He was in this world like an Arabian merchant, very eccentric. He loved scholarly pursuits, he loved trade and everything. And when he found this kid laying on the side of the road, he couldn't help but feel horrible for him, and he wanted to save his life. So he took Daraine in, and he nursed him back to health. And once he heard about... The saddest part about it was when he heard about what had happened, Daraine had thought, oh, they'll find me, they'll come for me, my parents will come. But Jodar helped him get through the reality that they weren't coming back,
that they didn't want anything to do with him.
And Jodar pushed him to focus on himself. Jodar pushed him to get past that.
So essentially, Jodar was the dad that he never really had.
Exactly.
Okay.
And Jodar also did a few things that really helped him out, and that was Jodar pushed him to work on two things immensely, and that was his mind and his body, because in his mind, he knew that Daraine was very hurt. He knew that he had his deficiencies, and the same could be said about his body. So what he wanted to do was he wanted him to focus on himself and learn about himself so he can move forward and overcome any problem he came across. And he had him work on his body because he introduced him to martial arts. And it was just him, at the time for Jodar and Daraine, it was just something to get him more fit and to get him to work on his weakness with his bones to where he wasn't such a fragile boy.
Yeah.
But despite having less than no talent for the art at the time, having deficiency for it, he grew to love it because he loved working on himself. He loved seeing the improvement that came with time.
So that's essentially what pushed him to become
better.
Yeah. Okay, what's his motivation like then? Like, what became his motivation throughout his entire life? What was it?
Well, what Daraine becomes later in life is he becomes a teacher, a guider of sorts. He's a great martial artist. He is a great warrior. He's a great scholar, adventurer. But what really sets him apart from your average everyday warrior or scholar, what have you, is that he's an amazing teacher. He finds these people that were similar to him, some kid left on the side of the road or somebody that's just not doing well in life. And
like a broken toy. He found broken toys.
Yeah,
it's like the island of the misfit toys.
Yeah, he found the misfits, he found the miscreants, he found the ones that had no hope, and he instilled that hope in them. He guided them towards the thing that they loved, and he always was there when they needed it. It wasn't just, he didn't just put them towards martial arts just because that was his main love. No, if they wanted to learn how to paint, he helped them there. If they wanted to learn how to sing, he helped them there, even though he has the flattest voice of any man.
Yeah, he's not, it doesn't, just because he's not proficient at it doesn't mean he can't teach you how to do it. It's not.
That's a big part of his character too. He's very good at teaching you even if he can't do it himself, because he takes the time to learn.
So that's his motivation. He's just a teacher throughout his entire life. That's the one focal point in his character, is he just teaches people.
Yeah, he just teaches people. He wants to better the world by increasing understanding and helping people get through their issues. Sometimes it bites him in the butt because
there are bad people out there, and sometimes he chooses the wrong one.
He chooses the wrong one every now and then, but he tries his damnedest to help everyone he can come across.
Yeah.
And he's such a gentle soul about it.
That's one thing I've always loved about that character. It's just it's something that's a bit different from your normal everyday character. Because most characters they just want to whoop ass. They just want to kick your ass. They just want to take names. They just want to, I beat you and I'm better than you. My dick is bigger than yours. And
exactly.
You come in with this character and he just wants to teach people. He just wants to increase the understanding of certain things.
You can have the worst person come at him and he takes the time to try and understand them. The only times that he will lash out and take you down is if you're a threat to his life or the threat to the lives of others.
Specifically children, right? He's very protective over children. Just like Edon is.
Extremely protective over children.
Right. Because of what happened to him as a kid.
Exactly.
So that shaped how he felt towards just children in general. Okay. If there's one thing he could do in his world, what would it be? Just one thing that he could do that he never does, that he wishes he could do.
He really wishes he could learn other forms of magic, and he really wishes that he could just express himself properly.
Okay. Explain the expression right now, because I'm sure that they're kind of confused as to what you mean by that.
One very, very notable part of Daraine's character is he cannot express normally. He is very kind, he's very warm-hearted, he's always trying to help, but the problem is he can't express it physically. He's always got a monotone voice, his face always looks deadpan, except for the tiniest flickers that show through that most people aren't going to pick up on. Everything feels mute when it comes from him, and everything seems to sort of fall on a flat note.
So even the sweetest things he could say to like a lover just falls flat just because that's the way his voice sounds. He can't express himself emotionally, basically. Why is he like that? What triggered that in him?
It's a bit of it's a mixture of both chemical imbalance and his upbringing. Because it started off as just a little quirk that could have been ironed out, but through what he went through as a child, it made it even worse to where it was more set in stone. It wasn't something that you could get rid of. And because it became more than just a little bit of a quirk, it became a schism in his mind.
Okay. Again, it's a wonderful thing to explain that. I just what does he love to do? What are his hobbies other than teaching? Because we've already gone over teaching. So what does this guy love to do other than teaching and martial arts, which you've already expressed? What are some of his passions?
Well, he loves doing what I call pulling a Bob Ross. Because he loves to paint, he loves to draw, he loves to do poetry, he loves to write, he loves to read, he loves to travel.
So he just loves to be a creative person. He just loves being creative.
He expresses himself in every way that he can because
he can't do it emotionally through expression. So he's like Bob Ross, huh? So he's like I'm gonna paint I just painted this little bush. Why don't we give it a little friend? Because everyone needs a friend every once in a while.
Exactly.
Bob Ross was just an amazing person. Okay. Who's the big antagonist in each phase of his life? His young phase, his youth, his young adult phase, and his maturity. Each enemy in each one. 3 enemies. Or more.
It's quite obvious who his enemy was in his early youth.
His family.
It was his family and the society he grew up in.
So he never really had to combat himself or any self-doubts that he had because his family was calling him these things?
They instilled a lot of self-doubt and a lot of issues.
So
he was his own enemy as well as having to deal with the enemies around him. He was in a very, very tough point in his life because he had no support system. He had nothing to rely on.
Okay. And as he grows, young adult phase, who's his biggest enemy?
Young adult phase, as I've said, he was an adventurer and he went through a lot of things. He eventually breaks off from Jodar and travels on his own, and when he did, he was a bit hot-blooded at the time. Everyone hits that phase in their life. Mm-hmm. And he went into war because he wanted to make a difference. He wanted to spur into the moment and change the world because he was very passionate. He wanted to do everything he could.
Right.
And his first experience with war was absolutely god-awful. He was about average at the time. He wasn't extraordinary in his martial arts or his magic at the time. He doesn't get to that level until later in his life.
Mm-hmm.
So what he ended up going against as a mercenary, because he wasn't an actual soldier, was he got put up against some very, very twisted people. When he was in war, he saw some things that it's not really something that I would probably explain right now because it's very graphic. There's one
just state what these twisted people were like and how they
there's
were his biggest enemy.
the worst person in his young adult life was a person that was very much akin to Vlad the Impaler.
Okay.
He came into a battlefield, and all he saw was, as he walked through these woods, were a bunch of bodies lynched in trees.
Okay.
He was an absolutely horrifying person, incredibly sadistic, and
A true psychopath, not a sociopath. A true psychopath. That's what you're describing him as.
But the thing was, Daraine was no great hero at this point. He was powerless to do anything that would do a true mark to stop the man. He was just another soldier, and he was lucky to have survived. It was a very narrow escape, and it was a very close brush with death, and it helped him grow a lot as a person. But he didn't get to be the great savior that stopped the great evil.
Okay, we're gonna go off before he goes into the maturity because I just have a separate question for that. Does he ever come back, and does he ever defeat this person, or is this person ever defeated by another person?
That victory is stolen from. There's another that takes it.
Okay, I just wanted to know if that conflict was ever resolved. So, in his maturity.
His greatest enemy that he ever comes across is another character of mine named Dracanis Alvarak.
And how is Dracanis his biggest enemy?
Dracanis Alvarak is
You don't have to go into full detail, just state intentions.
He's a pure and simple megalomaniac sociopath.
Not a psychopath, right? Just a sociopath.
The sociopath.
Okay.
He is the product of his surroundings. And what really sucked for Daraine is he saw that, and even though this was such a terrible person, I'm not going to sugarcoat it whatsoever. He is a bad guy. Daraine did want to help him. In his first encounter with Dracanis tried to take his life. But because he's very keen to his surroundings, he's very in tune with the world around him, Dracanis is an illusionist. The illusions 9 times out of 10 would not work on him, so he saw through it, and he brought Dracanis down, and the worst mistake that he made was sparing Dracanis in that moment. Because the second that he let that little sociopath live, he made it his mission to take Daraine down purely because of how great of a threat he was. And it ends up being he's a very formidable person to make an enemy of, and that's why he's his greatest enemy.
Does he suffer from these conflicts he's in? And describe how he suffers through them, and just describe what comes in. What are the consequences of dealing with these enemies that he comes with? Youth, young adult, mature.
Well, when he goes through what he did as a child, it made the deficiencies he already had even worse. It set them in stone in his body and mind, where they were much harder to get rid of. The physical one, you can almost always work at your physical faults.
Yeah.
But the mental one and the magical one, because they instilled that doubt and because they instilled that feeling of deficiency, it just made it even worse to where he can
never get rid of that self-doubt no matter how hard he works at himself.
No, it's always going to be there.
So his magical limitation is more mental than it is actual not being able to perform it.
Yeah, it's a mental block.
Okay.
It's both the expressive deficiency and the ice magic only being able to come out are one and the same.
Okay.
His face only allows the cold to show, just as his magic only allows the cold to show.
What does he suffer from going against this terrible person you went up against as a young adult, as a hot-blooded young adult?
Well, what it taught Daraine was that you can't always win. You can't always be the hero. You can't always be the one that makes the big difference. He came into there thinking he was going to take this down. He thought he was going to be the one that helped save the day. But one of the first thing that happens to him is he gets stuck in a medical tent because he was a casualty of a rain of arrows. one of the simplest and most deadly things that you will see in medieval warfare.
Yeah, randomness of warfare is it's downplayed in a lot of media these days, like, because that stuff wasn't all with flair and whatnot. I understand the flair is needed from the media, but my point stands. And back to it though, his maturity. How does Dracanis change him?
Dracanis it's his big mistake. It's the one thing that if Daraine chose to have killed him in that moment, he would have prevented a lot. He would have prevented a lot of death. He would have prevented a lot of pain and suffering for others. He would have prevented a lot of oppression. And as he realizes this great fault, he feels absolutely horrible because he knows he genuinely could have stopped all of this. As this sick and twisted sociopath, and this is a bit of a spoiler for the story, Dracanis becomes an emperor. He comes to power and he takes everything over. As he takes the mantle, Daraine watches the world that he loves fall around him, and it's a very heavy burden to know that you could have stopped that.
So, we know what?
In essence, it's the complete opposite of what he went through as a child, or a young adult, I should say.
Okay. So we know that he beats his troubles in his youth with Jodar's help. Jodar is the biggest help in his youth. But how does he beat the suffering that he went through as a young adult? And how does he beat the suffering he goes through with Dracanis?
Well, when it comes to what he went through as a young adult, he still knew Jodar, and that guy was a great support system for him.
Mm-hmm.
But it was in his young adult days that, through that experience actually taught him that he needs to look beyond himself. And that's when he got into teaching, actually. That's when he got into trying to impart his wisdom onto others.
So, by becoming a teacher, that's how he beat the...
That's how he beat the pain. That's how he beat the pain of not always being able to make a difference.
Okay. And with Dracanis, did he ever beat his pain?
I can't say he did.
So he lives with that for the rest of his days.
He
can't beat it.
That's something that he takes to his grave.
That's depressing. To get away from depressing for a second, what's the strangest thing about Daraine? The strangest thing.
He loves sugar. He loves sweet food. Oh my god. There's this one time where he's sitting at a banquet with a queen, and they're all having a very fancy dinner. And what he does is he goes to shake some sugar on his gelatin. The top pops off, dumps a ton of sugar, his reflexes kick in, and he gets it away to where it doesn't all dump out. But there's just an icy trail on his plate. And he looks at it for a second, and he's just like, you know what, I'm not letting this go to waste. So he just gets his spoon, takes a bite, and all you hear is a loud crunch as he's sitting there mowing that crunchy gelatin.
So he loves sugar. That's the strangest thing about him.
He really loves sugary foods.
So, the guy just loves sweets then.
Yeah, he really likes his sweets.
Yeah. All right. Does he ever find love? With who?
Well, the thing about Daraine is he spends a lot of his time incredibly isolated, and he doesn't really have time for an extended relationship per se. But he did have a night of passion with a woman at one point, but that relationship didn't maintain itself. And he didn't even remember the night because he was very inebriated.
So he never finds anyone to be with? He's always alone throughout the entirety of his life?
He finds solace and companionship in the people that he comes to make friends with and the students that he's made. He also finds companionship in a rival that he makes, known as Sir Jackal Ellenvale. And that's a whole other...
That's a completely different entity.
Within himself. But he did touch base with a daughter around the end of his life. And he didn't know she existed, and it was from that one night of passion.
Okay. And so his journey never really has romance. It's more so just companionship.
Yeah, his story isn't really focused on romance at all.
Well, I wasn't... No, okay. I didn't mean to say it was focused on romance. I was just asking if it ever really had romance in it.
No, it doesn't really have any romantic focus to it.
All Where does he love to be the most? What's his happy place? The place the one location that makes him happiest.
The one place that he loves to be in the most is in the mountaintop, in the mountainous forest during the wintertime. It's this place to where there's these running rivers, there's waterfalls, there's plenty of greenery, and even during the winter there's plenty of greenery because there's a lot of pine forest to it.
Okay.
And he loves the cold, he loves the isolation, he loves the peace that he feels, he loves the animals and the smell of the breeze, and he loves being up so high and getting a view on the world that's all around him.
Me too, by the way. Anyway, what makes him desire to pursue such extreme capabilities? Because let's not sugarcoat it. He is an extreme person when it comes to martial arts. He is an extreme person when it comes to travel.
Yeah.
So what pushes him? What makes him go so far to achieve this kind of stuff?
Well, the thing about Daraine is, in his early life, he comes very, very to terms with his own weakness. He comes very, very to terms with what he can't do. So he sets out to correct that. He sets out to work on that, and he makes it an entire journey of self-improvement along with his teaching. That's his secondary focus, actually, is self-improvement. Always working on yourself. There's never a moment to where, well, there are a few moments here and there. Let's all be honest here. Everyone gets a case of the sads.
Yeah.
But
time to time, we all get sad. One day you're happy, then you're sad.
But if I were to say anything about him when it comes to that, he is one of the most mentally fortuitous people that you will ever meet when it comes to focusing on yourself and always working and on moving forward. And he gets to be an extreme person because he's always on it. He's very dedicated. He's always making sure to do that extra push-up. He's making sure to punch that extra tree. Yes, he punches trees. Boulders, too. And he's always making sure to stay on top of it. And in that, it reaches levels of extremes. And it goes in hand to where he wants to be a better teacher. He wants to be a better person to guide the people that follow him.
Okay. So, with all that, you just extremism. But what makes him relatable? Wait, hold on. Let me rephrase that. What aspect of him shows off his humanity? What makes him? Yeah, this is somebody that I can see.
He struggles a lot. There's hardly a time where Daraine breezes through things except very late in his life. Daraine is not someone that's meant to be perfect. Not by any stretch of the word.
Well, perfection is a fantasy as it is.
Exactly.
We chase it, but we never achieve it.
Daraine starts off as less than your average person. He starts off from a point that is lower, but he pushes himself past that to become something great.
Okay. Now here's my retort to that. A lot of people, common people, are just your average people. There are some less than average people out there, but they don't do that kind of thing. So what makes that even relatable? What makes that, oh, that could be me one day, or something like that?
What makes it to be, oh, that could be me one day is you see him struggle when he first starts out, and there are times he does get hurt. There are times he very harshly fails. But what he shows is that when you fail, you don't stop.
If you fail once.
When you fail once, it's just a part of your journey. And he does fail a lot. He failed against the second biggest villain in his life. It may not be a complete failure because someone else killed him, but personally, it was still a failure in his eyes.
Okay. And with that, we're going to get into, you've hinted at it throughout this interview. You've hinted at this is what happens to him, this is how he dies. So how does he die? Explain it for them, and why is he killed? I just spoiled it right there.
Well, what happens is the final greatest villain that he comes across, Dracanis Alvarok, is the one that ends his life. The reason that he kills Daraine is because He is a sociopath. Any threat needs to be destroyed. And in Daraine showing that he is stronger than him, in Daraine showing that he has the capability to take him down, he makes it his personal mission to see to the end of his life. Dracanis is an absolute, thorough, logical machine. What he did was he took in every facet of his life just to build at killing him, and it took a lot of preparation. And
so how does Dracanis deliver the killing blow?
He tries a number of things, actually. He tries to wear him down over a period of time, playing at his weaknesses, playing at his isolation, and what happens is that it doesn't go completely correctly, is once Daraine realized something wasn't right, that something was wearing down at him, weakening him, he sought him out, and he ended up going off in a face-off against Dracanis because Dracanis couldn't escape. His illusions were not sufficient enough to get away from this person that was so in tune from his surroundings, but he was weakened. And Dracanis had taken the time to learn all of his techniques, had taken the time to learn everything he could do. And as they face off, even in Daraine's failure, he did something that was very significant. He showed Dracanis that not even with all the preparation in the world can you always win, because it was a very, very close match. And what happens is it ends with him basically being executed. Dracanis had a bum arm. He was almost knocked out from a frozen temple of his head and a frozen lung. But Daraine loses in that face-off, and that's how he dies, which is a very sad ending because it's his greatest failure leads up to his death.
Okay, but so you explained that Daraine does something significant by showing Dracanis that even through thorough preparation you can't always win. But if Dracanis still won despite being injured, so what exactly do you mean by you can't win? Did he do something that lasted with Dracanis, that like winning in some way, even though he died?
Dracanis almost died. He came very, very close to death, and it messed up his lungs to where his ability to breathe was hampered for the rest of his life, as well as he chipped at his ability to think as logically as he used to always, because he froze a part of his brain, actually. Even through medical attention, it couldn't be fixed. So even in losing, Daraine left him with some debilitating weaknesses, which he was still a very efficient killer afterwards, but to someone so thorough, to someone that everything needs to go absolutely correct for it to still go so wrong, and for him to come so close to dying, and having ended it all with being debilitated in some ways to where he would have actually been better off leaving Daraine alone. Mm-hmm. He came to realize he needed to be more careful. He needed to not try to take everything down, but it didn't completely stick with him. But it still showed him. It still showed him the light. Yeah,
and that's another story in itself. With that, that's the last question that I have for him, and that's pretty much it for Daraine. We'll be back next week with 2 more characters.
Yep.
And yeah,
later, my dudes.
Later.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed one of the first of many of our creative podcasts. Please give us a like and a subscribe below, and I hope you can keep up with us as we create more content for you. Later, my dudes.